It is now my pleasure to call Mr. Tarun Khanna again to kindly deliver his address on India's leadership in preparing for climate change. Professor Tarun Khanna is the Jorge Paulo Lemann Professor at Harvard and the first director of the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, Harvard's university-wide endeavor straddling sciences, arts, and professions. His 4 books, Billions of Entrepreneurs, Writing in Emerging Markets, Trust, and Leadership to Last, distill lessons from and for entrepreneurs across the developing world. His online course, Entrepreneurship in Emerging Economies, has been taken by 750,000 students in over 200 countries and is one of the most popular open online courses of all time. We welcome you, sir, and we are looking forward to your session.
Good afternoon again. I note, as my friend and colleague Suman Berry just said, that we are dramatically behind time, so I tried to reclaim some of it. The task I was given was to say a few words about India's leadership in preparing for climate change. And I have a 3-part message, and I sort of had a preview of what my colleague Dan was about to say, and he is appropriately apocalyptic in some ways, right? Because we need to be alerted to the possibility of extreme damage and extreme distress to all of us and take steps now to do it. I'm by nature an optimist, a glass half full kind of person. So I'm going to paint a hypothetical story that, in my mind anyway, is a hypothesis for how we might move forward to try to be constructive. So my message is 3 parts. One is that through my more rose-tinted glasses, and I'm not implying this is easy at all, nor that it's inevitable. I'm just trying to be rhetorically provocative. That there are lots of opportunities around. I'm going to give you some examples. 2, that India in particular, especially with the digital revolution that we've gone through, I'm referring to the Aadhaar and the India stack and several layers going on. I think it's a multiplier for some of the initiatives that are already unfolding. And so that is something that India can share with the world and is starting to or trying to. And the second is, again, Suman Berry alluded to an initiative that I had the privilege to lead, the Atal Innovation Mission, for many years. And the piece of it that he spoke about is something that I find very hopeful. It's these simple play spaces for science in high schools. And it has allowed millions of children already across the length and breadth of India to think very differently about science as something to play with. And that's how you create great scientists, when you play with science and you get depth of expertise with problem solving. And I think we can use that kind of structure, not literally that structure, to reset the climate narrative for what the next generations can do to help us all move forward. So let me speak about the first of these, opportunities abound. And the first thing that I would say is the Economist had a survey a year or 2 ago, and the number that sticks in my mind was that 90% of research on climate change was going into climate mitigation and 10% into climate adaptation. It's appropriate, of course, to be thinking about not worsening the situation with greenhouse gas emissions, but the more pressing work for particularly those of us in the developing world, also elsewhere, but especially in the developing world, is how to deal with the here and now. Here and now meaning the next few decades. And that's an adaptation challenge. So somehow we need to, and I'm as guilty of this 90-10 as anybody else, as a technologist and a sometime entrepreneur. Whatever ventures I've worked on have been more on the climate mitigation space than on the adaptation side. But the opportunities are equally plentiful from where I see it. I'm just going to put a sampling of examples up there. These are some that I want to call out. The logo on the top left, I see my colleague Soumya here in the front row. We're both on the board of this nonprofit called Fast India, which is Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, that does a lot of work on how we can accelerate India's attention to science. These are a sampling of companies that the Fast India team pulled together to say that these are all working on climate mitigation in some ways. Well, not all, at least three of them. The one on the top left is essentially using liquid molten salts, relatively lower cost liquid molten salts, to extract water from the air and finding ways to release it again through pretty low cost processes to deal with water scarcity. It's trying to reimagine water infrastructure in places that it needs some reimagination. The one on the top right is trying to use more plentiful sodium to create lithium-sodium rechargeable batteries. Lithium is plentiful here, and sodium is plentiful here, and lithium is not. None of this is easy. I'm just saying that these are ones that have had pilot success. The one on the bottom left is trying to come up with a fundamentally different architecture for an electrolyzer to produce, if not green, then blue hydrogen, so to speak, which could be a wonderful fuel, but the economics are all out of whack currently. So these are sort of more on the mitigation side, but if you go, it turns out that they're equally plentiful on the adaptation side. I put up two or three here that I'm familiar with from an arm's length distance. Kheti, which is working with small farmers, trying to come up with very efficient greenhouses, sometimes using 95% less water than a conventional greenhouse. Various IoT, Internet of Things, for those of you not familiar with the acronym, attempts to have intelligence for the way in which resources, way beyond drip irrigation, which is now familiar to most of us, better ways to decide how to nurture crops. And of course, there's a lot of science going into producing genetically modified crops that are more suitable to the kinds of environments that we see in the front. Now, the issue with all of these, whether it's mitigation or adaptation, scientific experiments, is they're all problem focused, but we have to scale them up to find a way for them to work, to move the needle in a decade or two. And that's, for those of you who follow this kind of work, it is not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. But I would submit to you that we do have some understanding of how to scale things up. In India, in particular, I should have mentioned this because this one just really made an impact on me just in the last couple of days. Rima Ben, my sister from Seva, is here in the front. We had, as I mentioned in my comments a few minutes ago, I guess it's more than a few minutes ago now, we had the opportunity to spend some time in Ahmedabad with a lot of my colleagues. And we spent a lot of it with the Seva sisters outside of Ahmedabad. And one of the lovely projects that they've been working on, some with the Rockefeller Foundation, is this idea of a parametric insurance product to protect informal workers, women workers, against extreme heat. Now, I put that up here because to me, it's a science project. It may not be science in the sense of mixing things in test tubes and the prototypical image of a scientist, but it's scientific in the sense that it's a scientific method. The idea here, very simply, is that rather than have informal workers suffer in extreme heat and them to bear the costs of their bodily exposure to extreme heat in the weeks, months, and years to come, when it manifests itself, wouldn't it be better if we could just compensate them for the loss of income and wages for that day and have them stay at home in some ways, and thereby prevent them and society from having to bear the costs of long-term damage, not to mention the moral cost. So this, to me, very much is an adaptation scientific effort. Now, as with the previous examples of Kheti and greenhouse in a box and what have you, the intellectual problem that should preoccupy us all is how do we take these wonderful pilot experiments and scale them up? It's not easy. It's actually fiendishly difficult. But I would say that we've had some experience with this. In India, space has been a sector that just in the last 3 or 4 years has really taken off, thanks to the pioneering work of our amazing scientists at ISRO, who never fail to inspire me, at least, and I'm sure a lot of us. But the point here is simply that we've taken fundamental scientific innovations and found ways, coupled with India's other technological prowess, sources of technological prowess, to convert it into something that works at greater scale. Admittedly, we are currently only 2 or 3% of the world's space economy, but probably rising to 10 to 15% in the next decade, with pretty conservative projections. So it's an example that we can learn from. And there are other places. This is an outfit that I'm affiliated with in New York, Detroit, and Riyadh. It's an organization that basically specializes in helping large corporations around the world. Think BMW, or think I don't know what's another large company, Siemens or someone like that. Essentially saying, we see all these experiments, right? We see the experiments that Seva is doing, or Aether Energy is doing, or Kheti is doing, but we would like, as a mainstream, large incumbent enterprise with tentacles all over the world, we'd like to be able to absorb that and disseminate it all over. That turns out to be, as someone who sits on the boards of many large companies, it's a very hard thing for large companies to do. Unfortunately, a more typical outcome is the large company would absorb the science, and then the science would peter out within the bureaucracy of the large companies. So New Lab is an entity that has developed a system to not allow this to happen, or to lower the odds of this happening, so that transition from interesting pilot, viable pilot, to global scale effect can happen. So why am I putting up these examples of Indian space and New Lab and so on? Simply to say that taking the opportunities that, to my rose-tinted eyes, abound, there are certainly ways that we have taught us as. We just need to look a little bit outside our conventional, that allow us to transcend our conventional blind spots. Conscious of time, my second point is to remind us that we do have India Stack. I know we've all experienced how much anytime you go through the airports with DigiYatra, or you use DigiLocker, or you use UPI, or what have you, it has made life a lot easier in many cases. Not that it's a panacea, but it's certainly done a lot of that. And I want to just highlight that this is a resource that the scientists among us should be thinking about. How I know that the technologists who produced India Stack, centered around Bangalore, but also in other places, are hard at work trying to figure out a climate stack, so to speak, that can be grafted on top of this to help with climate solutions. And a lot of those are climate adaptation solutions. I just put one up here on the top. The second one, carbon credit credentialing, I'm going to skip that. It's not really an adaptation thing. But the microtransaction, the idea that has been common through decades, maybe centuries in India, is reuse of materials, right? We were again speaking amongst ourselves, those of us who are of middle or advanced ages, and saying it's certainly been very common in our households to pass things from one generation to another and reuse them and reuse them. And it's a mark of pride, actually. It's not something that we would want to stop, because it turns out to be environmentally very friendly to do things like that. But what if you could have a reuse economy? There are so many ventures with market capitalizations in the billions of dollars that are in the so-called circular economy. And circular economy is just a fancy way to say reuse, repurpose and reuse. And my contention and hypothesis is that India Stack can be used to facilitate a much more dynamic circular economy in just about every possible way. That's a technologically feasible something that I imagine that I have line of sight to how to pull something like that off in select sectors. So if I can think about it, I'm sure all of us can do much better than that. The last thing is reshaping the narrative. This is the Atal Innovation Mission. And I would submit to you that the way that I was taught science in my wonderful schools in Bombay, now Mumbai, and Bengaluru, was in the conventional way, which wasn't super inspiring. It was more lecture and rote. And it's just so lovely to see these tinkering labs that are opening in all these schools all over the country, government schools, private schools, affluent schools, schools that are lacking resources. And think about it, it's a tinkering lab is probably no bigger than the space of this stage up here, and has tons of equipment. It has robotics, soft robotics, microcontrollers, circuitry of all sorts, simulation engines, 3D printers, all of which are available for literally very small sums of money, and can even be donated by large corporations. And all it takes is that and permission to the kids to take the science that they are reading about in their textbooks and tell them to go crazy in adapting it to their local problems. And some unbelievable things are coming out, so much so that the ATLs are being exported to so many other countries now under the leadership of my colleague at MIT, Chintan Vaishnav, who until recently was leading the Atal Innovation Mission. Again, I'm putting it up here because I think it's an attempt that some friends and I tried to initiate 10 years ago, and it's lovely to see it changing the conversation about science. And my submission to you is that we can change the conversation for the next generations, reset the narrative, if you will, with the next generation about climate adaptation. And that's something that we should certainly try to do. And my last note here is to share with you an initiative that my colleagues at the Mittal Institute are doing, which is we're going to start putting out, we're going to start putting out a monthly climate digest that will summarize as a way of spreading and sharing literacy on this, to stay informed on local and global climate news, particularly about climate adaptation, and particularly as it applies to India and the countries of South Asia. So with that, I thank you again for your attention and look forward to the panel discussion that follows. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khanna, for such an insightful and delightful presentation.